CV 10-19-4293, Christopher Tapp, petitioner, State of Idaho respondent. We have here for the state, we have Daniel Clark and John Dewey, and for the defense we have John Thomas, Peter Neufeld, Jennifer Cummins, and Vanessa Hodkin. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So, purpose of the hearing today is, as I mentioned, there's been a petition for post-conviction relief filed by Mr. Tapp. I will state that this court had before it a few years ago 2 other post-conviction relief actions filed by Mr. Tapp, which resulted in dismissal of a rape charge and Mr. Tapp being released from prison after having served 20 years. With the murder charge remaining. Today, the post-conviction relief action requests dismissal of all charges on the basis of innocence, and the state of Idaho has filed a motion asking the court basically to grant the post-conviction relief request. So, Mr. Thomas, you have filed that motion. I think it's appropriate for you to state that motion here in court. You would do so?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm Mr. Clark.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Clark.
I wanted the court to know that Brent Dodge would like to make a statement to the court, and I think the court's preference is to hear that later in this hearing. Is that correct?
I'd like to hear your motion. After I hear the motion and I hear any response by the defense, then I'd be happy to hear any statements by the victim. I'd be happy to also hear from Mr. Tapp.
Thank you. Let me first start off by saying that what's being done here today is with the consultation and consent of the victim's family, and I think that's important for the court to know and for everyone to know. I also want to acknowledge just the gravity of what we're doing here today. There's no doubt there are failings in the criminal justice system. I think this case is evident of that. We stridently try to hold offenders accountable while still protecting the rights of victims. And sometimes that comes late, sometimes perhaps not at all. But there's no doubt that hindsight's 20/20. And this case certainly speaks to that effect. I want to first just comment on the purpose of our motion that we brought to the court is under Rule 3.8 G and H of the Idaho Rules of Professional Responsibilities for Prosecutors. I think that's something that we take very seriously. It states in summary that if there's new evidence which tends to negate the guilt of the accused, we must disclose that to the defense and seek to investigate or otherwise understand the details of that. That's gone on, off and on, for some time over the last several years. But most pointedly, to about 2 months ago, the Idaho Falls Police Department, as they continued to work on this case, got to the point where the DNA that was always in question in this case became known. During the course of that investigation, that happened very rapidly. They had an interview with that suspect. During the course of that interview, that suspect indicated an acknowledgement to the crime. I'm not going to go into the details of that, because that's still a pending issue, but I want the court to know that. I also want the court to know that that defendant indicated that he acted alone. Since that time, we disclosed that information to Mr. Tapp's legal team. We then also went to test the veracity of those statements. Anytime statements are made to police, there should be an effort to test, to corroborate those statements. I won't go into the detail of that as to what's gone on over the last couple of months, but the police have worked very hard, very diligently to get answers to those things that were raised during the course of that interview. What I can tell the court here today is that based upon the follow-up investigation by the police, I can tell the court that what's able to be corroborated regarding Mr. Dripps' statements, I believe have been. And it's shown that those statements were true. Now, I don't know, there's no way to speak to, when he says he acted alone, there's no real way to speak to that. But other things that he said, we've been able to verify as true, and therefore willing to conclude also that the statement regarding acting alone is also true. That is certainly new evidence. That is evidence that, in my opinion, is clear and convincing, which is a standard that I must abide by in bringing this motion. It's in my view, there's clear and convincing evidence the defendant was convicted of a crime for which he did not commit. Based upon that, under our ethical rules and the relief for the procedural vehicle under the new post-conviction case, we're going to move to dismiss, vacate the jury verdict, and move to dismiss that case.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Clark. I appreciate the fact that you come into this way late. You were the prosecutor when this case was prosecuted, and this falls on you to take care of the prosecutor's responsibility. So I appreciate the work that you've done. So, Mr. Dewey, I'm assuming the defense does not have an objection to the state's motion.
Mr. Thomas, Your Honor.
Excuse me, Mr. Roberts.
We do not have an objection to the state's motion. However, in support of our no objection, we would say a few things, if that's okay with the court.
I've never known you not to have something.
That's right. Thank you, Judge.
I fully expected you to want to.
So what I would like to tell the court and the gallery, that this is a monumental day for Chris Tapp, for his mother and for their family. He gets his rights back, he gets his good name back, and the ability to hold his head up high in the face of this community. We should also see it as a monumental day for Carol Dodge and her 3 sons. There's no way that Angie would have wanted an innocent man to rot in prison because of the dastardly deeds of a handful of individuals. Whether it was misguided or malicious, it really doesn't matter at this point. The result is the same. Chris Tapp was innocent. I'm confident that we would not be here today if it were not for Carol Dodge and her desire to solve this murder and bring Angie's case into the national spotlight. We need to look to the future with an eye to the past and learn from our mistakes. In order to appreciate the true magnitude of how monumental this day really is, let's pause for just a moment and think about what we have done and what we have been able to accomplish in the last 20 years as individuals, and realize that Chris Tapp and his family have put their lives on hold. How would we feel if we missed 20 birthdays, 20 summers, 20 Thanksgivings and Christmases? How would we feel if we had missed our own father's funeral, as Chris did, while he was incarcerated for a crime that he had nothing to do with? Chris missed some of the best years of his life. His 20s and his 30s were gone. The prosecutor at the time of the sentencing asked for the death penalty. And what a tragedy that would have been for this community had we, as a community, had gone along with that and actually put this man to death. But at the same time, Chris has carried on. He's an inspiration and should be an inspiration to us all. He has every reason to be bitter and angry. Even as the writing was on the wall and the evidence mounted as to his innocence, there were countless people who devoted time and money and energy to keep Chris Tapp behind bars. Chris has no hatred or anger for those people, and the way that he lives his life is proof positive that there is great power in forgiveness. Today is his day, and we rightly celebrate him in his triumph. Over the years, those who were directly involved in the perpetration of this injustice were very vocal about keeping Chris behind bars and didn't hesitate to remind me and most of the people working on this case that he was a convicted murderer. But as I look around today, their absence is noticeable, and their silence is very revealing and it speaks volumes. But on the other hand, the good news is that there were many people who came together to help right this wrong. Many of those people are sitting here in the courtroom. Some are sitting at the council table. But there were many, many who helped in this case. The ugly truth is that Chris Tapp was robbed of 20 years of his life. And while he can't give those years back, what we can do is commit to learn from the past and make the truth and justice more important than conviction rates. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And truer words were never spoken. It's important for each of us to stand tall against injustice, because if we don't, we never really know when that injustice might come for us or for someone that we love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any other defense counsel have anything to say?
Yes, Judge. Mr. Thomas just spoke of learning from the past. And to do that in this case, we really need to take a moment and be willing to look at what happened 22 years ago within the walls of the Idaho Falls Police Department. Christopher is the 367th person to be exonerated by DNA testing nationwide, and a staggering 28% of people who have been proven innocent with DNA made false confessions during custodial interrogations. In Chris's case, police interrogated Chris 9 times over the course of 3 weeks, subjecting him to 7 polygraph examinations and in excess of 30 hours of interrogation. While the span of his interrogation in some senses is unheard of, the tactics that police utilized to induce Chris to falsely incriminate himself are commonly used within this state and throughout the country and have been responsible for scores of wrongful convictions. Police refused to entertain Chris's claims of innocence. He said, "I didn't do this." They told him he was lying. And when he said he had no knowledge, they suggested that somewhere in his subconscious he could recover some memory of doing something that he was adamant that he had no involvement in. They used deception and false evidence. They falsely told him that he failed polygraphs, that the machine was saying that he was lying. They threatened him with the gas chamber. They promised him help and leniency if he confessed. They told him he wouldn't be prosecuted if he gave a statement that conformed with the police theory of how Angie Dodge was murdered. And there were red flags in the statement that ultimately came to be after those 9 interrogations. Chris couldn't provide any credible account of what happened to Angie. He didn't know key details of the crime. He didn't know what her apartment looked like, which is where her murder occurred. He didn't know the layout, the date of the murder, the time of the murder, what she was wearing, the room she was killed in, or even the weapon that was used to kill her. The state just talked about the importance of corroboration when you get a statement, going out and taking details from the statement that the police didn't know at the time of the interrogation and being able to verify, to corroborate them, to corroborate the confession. And there was no corroboration in Chris's confession. There was no new detail about the crime that police didn't already know that they could then go out and corroborate to show that this confession was reliable. In fact, the opposite was true, right? The only details that Chris got right were details that originated from officers themselves during the interrogation, when Chris was shown photographs of the crime scene, when police drew diagrams for him and took him to the crime scene as well. And I think that, most significantly, the DNA didn't match him, right? There was semen evidence that almost certainly was left from the person who committed this crime. And the more testing that was done just established that there was one profile. All indications, all forensic evidence pointed to the fact that this crime was committed by one person. And when the DNA didn't match Chris, instead of saying, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is a huge red flag. We may have the wrong person. We need to reevaluate our theory here." Instead, police tried again to conform and to pull new people in. In fact, there's several people in the third row here wearing shirts "innocent." And some of these individuals were people who were accused and cleared themselves through DNA testing. Despite all of the problems that were evident in Chris's confession, I mean, these were 30 hours, not the entire confession was videotaped, but a good portion of it was. And you see these tactics being utilized. You see somebody in despair and distress, a young, vulnerable 20-year-old kid. And despite all of the discrepancies and red flags that existed at the time, you know, Chris was convicted, and police, prosecutors, juries, fact finders all put confidence in this statement, as problematic as it was, over real scientific evidence that was pointing to the fact that this man was innocent. So we want this to be a learning moment. You know, we can't just say, oh, the system corrected itself. It's not just about new technology coming into existence. You know, it's about looking at what is happening in interrogation rooms throughout this country and what evidence is being used to convict people in the city and the state and throughout the country. You know, we know there are reforms. About half the states in the country now videotape interrogations from their entirety. In Chris's case, again, much but not all of the interrogation was videotaped. So while it's important to have that record so we can know what happened and juries and fact finders can examine what went on in the interrogation room, we need to change the techniques themselves that are used and the way that interrogation is conducted. We've got to eliminate deception in the interrogation room and other psychologically coercive techniques, using false evidence, threats of consequences, and there are alternative investigative techniques that can be used. And so we hope that Chris's case is not in vain, and it's a moment that we can learn from and enact reforms to really make sure that this doesn't happen to somebody else, and we don't have to wait 2 decades for the next technology to come out for this exoneration day to come.
Thank you, Ms. Tonkett. Mr. Newfeld, did you want to make a statement?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, that's new.
It sure is, Judge.
Okay, I would be happy to hear from, before I hear from you, Mr. Tapp, I will give you an opportunity to speak. I'd like to hear if there's any of the victims who want to make a statement.
Yes, sir, I think Brent Dodge would like to make a statement.
Mr. Dodge, if you come forward, I'd be happy to hear from you. You could just sit at council table there by,
Okay.
by Mr. Clark, if you'd like.
This way?
Yes. You'll just make sure you pull yourself up to that microphone. You don't have to stand, you can sit if you'd like.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the court and the gallery and to speak to you, Chris, and your family. What was your name again, ma'am?
Vanessa Potkin.
Vanessa, yeah. I would just like to take off where these folks have already left off, and that is that, yeah, we can learn some things from this. And what I've learned recently is that not only did the police at the time of my sister's murder, were they taking a lot of other people's DNA, but they took mine. And, you know, I question, you know, why would they do that? You know, we're grieving, we're in a really bad place, and they're taking our DNA. That, you know, there's some things that we can learn from that. So anyway, having said that, that just took me back so many years ago that I thought, and then come to find out that the very person that is the DNA donor lived across the street. You know, so anyway, it's just, there's lots of things where this thing got off track, and you've spoken to many of those. But this day, I think, is a day of healing for all of us. Mr. Clark said to me a couple of years ago, just before this court hearing 2 years ago, he said, I'm hoping that there is healing that can take place, not only in our lives, but in our families and in our community. And I don't think that he realized the brevity of his statement that he made at that time. because there's been a lot of healing take place in all of our lives, not only the Christopher's lives, but our lives and my immediate family, extended family. We've all healed from this process. And Chris, 20 plus years ago, he became the face of our pain when he was convicted. And all of our energy and all of our hatred and all of those ugly feelings became Chris's face. And if you look at it as a volume of books, maybe as the history of our lives, one of those volumes began with Chris. And certainly today, the end of that volume ends with Chris as well. It began and ends with him. I was just thinking of some of the chapters, kind of that same theme, some of the themes, the loss of Angie, and the grief, the loss, the pain, and then Chris maintaining his innocence throughout that process. And then we were always pointing to Chris, saying, "Chris, why won't you give up the DNA donor? What is the problem here?" And which sort of perpetuated the problem and fueled the fire of grief and pain, and healing couldn't take place. And then when Chris was let out, and I think you were the judge that facilitated that process, in the Idaho Falls Police Department, there was a renewed energy and I think I called it energy and focus on finding out who the DNA donor was. And that it's admirable what they've done. And we want to recognize them and thank them for getting it right. There are some things that were done wrong, and you mentioned those, but I believe they've learned from the past, and they've implemented policies and procedures that hopefully this will never happen again. I guess I want to just close where I began, and that is that Chris is a free man today. Well, I hope he'll be a free man. He's no longer the face of our county. There is really wisdom and truth in this statement, and it's not contrary at all, but the truth sets us free. And certainly that's Chris's end goal today. And lastly, I want to thank the community and those that have prayed for not only the Tapp's family, but our family, and helped us through this difficult time. And with that, I close my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Judge. Tapp, would you like to speak to the court?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may.
First off, I'd like to thank the court to give me the opportunity to speak. I'm thankful that I've been given this second chance of life. I've wasted 20 years of my life for something that I never did. But again, I also grew up in this 20 years. I became more forgiving, more understanding, more open, more honest, and able to see things in a different light that I may never had the opportunity to. But it's a sad state of affairs that I had to spend 20 years to become this. But I'm thankful that my name, my last name, because I am the namesake of my family, and I am the last of the Mohican, as you would say it. And I'm thankful that my mother will know that this last name is clean. And that's the most important thing to me in this world. And I'm thankful for my mother, who supported me for 20 years, worked 2 jobs to make sure that I was taken care of. I am in her debt more than she'll ever know. I'm thankful for Carol Dodge, Brent Dodge, the Dodge family, for continuing to push forward, to believing in me when they actually saw the truth, and continue to be one of my loudest voices in this world. I am so grateful and humbled to be there for them. I'm thankful to my attorneys, all of them through these last 22 years of this adventure for me. John Thomas, Vanessa Pocket, Peter Neufeld, Dennis Benjamin. There's so many that have stood beside my side and fought for me and believed in me. Even when I didn't have the fight left in me in some of these hearings, they continued to push forward and fight for me. I am grateful and thankful for them. To all the programs that's helped me and stood behind me. The Idaho Innocence Program, Judges for Justice. Without the help of these programs, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. And I'm grateful and thankful for them. I support and I love the community of Idaho Falls. Like Brent was just saying, I understand it. For about 14 years, I was the face of what they thought was evil. And it sucked. It truly was hard for my family. But again, they were able to change and open and see the truth and turn around and be open and welcoming and loving to my family and to myself. I am very grateful and humbled to have that in my life. Thankful for my wife who saw me and took a chance on me. At the time when we got married, I was a convicted felon. But she took a chance, and all the highs and lows that we had to go through to get to this point, but she stood beside me and loved me every step of the way. I'm very honored to have her by my side. I'm just glad that I was able to come out this end of it, still smiling and still happy and still have that positive attitude that I had before I left. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tapp. Well, as I mentioned before, the court presided over 2 prior post-conviction relief actions that basically dealt with the newly discovered evidence with regard to the interrogation that occurred when Mr. Tapp made his confession. The court did not dismiss those cases because it felt that there was evidence there that needed to be explored and tried before the court. And that resulted in the prior proceeding that I've already mentioned, where Mr. Tapp, through agreement with the state, which was approved by the court, had his rape conviction dismissed when the murder conviction stayed. And he was released from prison. I think that was about 2 years ago, as I recall. So in hindsight, I'm glad we got to that point. And it's very fortunate for all of us, I believe, that the prosecutor's office continued to look for the person who now has been alleged to have committed the actual crime, and use the DNA evidence to come to this point. Because of my knowledge of the prior proceedings and the petition that has been filed and the motion filed by the state, I agree with the state that there is clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Tapp was wrongly convicted. So I am going to grant the state's motion to dismiss both the rape conviction and the murder conviction on the basis of actual innocence of Mr. Tapp. Those convictions were in State v. Tapp, CR 1997-489. Tapp, as far as this court is concerned, you are innocent of the convictions that you've been living under for the past 20-plus years. I don't think any of us could imagine what it would be like to experience an imprisonment for something we didn't know. So I don't think any of us can really put ourselves in your place. But I'm just glad that that can be corrected at this time. And I feel privileged to be part of that. I believe that takes care of what we needed to do today. Am I right, Mr. Clark?
That's all state.
Mr. Thomas?
We are not objecting to anything the state has to do today.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. You're all excused, and we're off to